By 1945, the United States was the only major industrial power whose soil remained completely untouched by the war. With European and Asian infrastructure in ruins, America stepped in to become the factory of the world. This immense manufacturing dominance triggered an economic boom at home. Developers bought up empty land outside cities and built massive, standardized tract housing, places like Levittown, New York, where you could get a house for $1,000 down. Suddenly, millions of people had the disposable income to buy homes, cars, and brand new appliances. But underneath that comfortable suburban surface, there was a profound daily dread. Families equipped those brand new homes with underground fallout shelters, stocking them with canned water and Geiger counters. The Soviet Union had built an atomic bomb much sooner than expected, plunging the globe into a nuclear arms race. The wealthiest society in human history was now completely consumed by the fear that Soviet missiles, or communist infiltrators, could end their lives at any moment. We often picture the 1950s as a tranquil, pristine decade. In reality, it was an era of harsh contradictions, where intense domestic prosperity shared a zip code with the literal fear of the apocalypse. The massive expansion of the American middle class didn't happen by accident. In 1944, the government signed the GI Bill, giving 16 million returning veterans access to low-interest, zero-down-payment mortgages, as well as heavily subsidized college tuition. Soon after, the Interstate Highway Act of 1956 carved thousands of miles of pavement across the country. This physical restructuring allowed people to live far from urban centers, giving rise to sprawling, automobile-dependent suburbs. Living out in the suburbs required new habits and new purchases. The construction industry standardized sizes for kitchen cabinets and refrigerators, allowing factories to churn them out faster. By the end of the decade, 87% of American families owned a television set. This chart shows the real median family income in the United States from the end of the war into the 1960s. You can see a steady, steep upward trajectory. Thanks to strong collective bargaining agreements, blue-collar assembly line work paid well enough to lift millions of factory workers out of the working class and into a much higher bracket. As that income line climbs, you start to see things like washing machines, daily car commutes, and annual family vacations, items that used to be strictly reserved for the wealthy, becoming standard expectations for the average industrial worker. The American dream of a house, a yard, and a car was a carefully constructed economic engine. It required massive government subsidies and an industrial complex specifically calibrated for mass consumption. American leaders viewed the continued survival of this domestic consumer wealth as dependent on global stability and open markets. To protect these economic interests, the U.S. formalized a policy of containment, committing to stop the spread of communist influence at every border. That policy quickly turned hot in places like Korea. In 1950, American forces were deployed to repel a North Korean invasion, resulting in a brutal, years-long proxy war. It was also the first major conflict where Black and white American soldiers fought in newly integrated units. Then, in 1957, the Soviets successfully launched Sputnik, beating America into orbit. That metallic sphere passing overhead was a psychological blow to American self-confidence, kicking off a frantic, heavily funded technological race for dominance in space. Back on American soil, this constant geopolitical stress created a culture of deep suspicion. Because the enemy was ideological, people began searching for threats in their own neighborhoods, workplaces, and government offices. Senator Joseph McCarthy leveraged that anxiety to launch intense congressional investigations, claiming that communist spies had infiltrated the government and media. Using reckless allegations and aggressive interrogations, his witch hunts ruined the careers and lives of countless innocent citizens who were blacklisted from their industries. The 1950s consensus was enforced through a quiet, pervasive ultimatum: adhere strictly to the political and social status quo or face a permanent career blacklist and social exile. And for millions, the prosperity of the era was entirely out of reach. Despite the booming GNP, 1/5 of the American population still lived below the poverty line, struggling to afford basic necessities in what socialist writer Michael Harrington called the other America. This exclusion was violently enforced in the Jim Crow South, where rigid segregation laws restricted Black Americans to second-class status. Furthermore, discriminatory practices in federal housing loans and local zoning laws ensured that the vast majority of Black families were completely locked out of the new wealth accumulating in the suburbs. The post-war economic miracle had strict entry requirements. It was an exclusive club built on a foundation of systemic barriers and racial exclusion. Those systemic barriers couldn't hold forever. Marginalized groups began to organize, forming a massive grassroots campaign that used boycotts, sit-ins, and freedom rides to deliberately challenge the legality of segregation. The movement gained national traction with events like the Montgomery bus boycott. Everyday citizens, alongside organizers like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., placed their livelihoods and physical safety on the line to protest Jim Crow laws. Local authorities often responded with severe violence. The resistance to integration was so fierce that the president had to nationalize state forces and send in the U.S. Army just to protect Black high school students entering previously all-white buildings. Civil rights activists understood the power of the era's new technology. By orchestrating massive, nonviolent demonstrations like the March on Washington, they brought the brutal realities of Southern segregation directly into the living rooms of millions of Americans via the evening news. The movement turned the television set into a mirror. By broadcasting peaceful protesters being attacked by police dogs and fire hoses, organizers forced the entire country to confront the deep racial divisions sitting right beneath the surface. At the same time, the demographic explosion known as the baby boom was coming of age. For the first time, teenagers didn't have to immediately drop out of school to work and support their families. They had allowances, cars, and the economic freedom to create a distinct subculture of their own. They poured that disposable income into a loud, fast new genre called rock and roll. Musicians like Elvis Presley brought a raw energy that completely rejected the strict, prudish conformity their parents had carefully maintained. This shift toward youth and dynamism reached the White House with the election of John F. Kennedy. He brought an intellectual, energetic style to the presidency, launching programs like the Apollo missions, while simultaneously pushing the Cold War to its absolute limits during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In November 1963, Kennedy's assassination sent a massive psychological shockwave through the nation. Shortly after, his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, pushed through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, formally outlawing segregation and closing the book on the previous 2 decades of American life. The post-war boom built the physical suburbs, but the decade's internal struggles broke the silence of the 1950s, replacing the era's forced conformity with the legal and social framework of the modern civil rights movement.